All the way back in November of 2015, DICE ushered in a new take on the Battlefront franchise, which had seen copious amounts of success in the mid-2000s with pandemic Star Wars Battlefront and Star Wars Battlefront 2. Leading straight into the hype of Disney releasing what was soon to be one of the biggest films of all time, The Force Awakens, all eyes in the gaming world were on DICE's revival of the Battlefront franchise. It had a lot to live up to with its predecessors, and it's fair to say that responses upon the launch of this game weren't exactly positive, with just about the only praise that people could agree on was that the game looked amazing. The Frostbite engine had brought the Star Wars universe to life with the most impressive graphics ever seen in a Star Wars game. But once that novelty wore off, the game's flaws began to show, and that's when so many people turned sour on this game. There was a controversial season pass that was very expensive, there was no single player campaign, just shallow single player missions with a diorama mode, and it was also restricted to just one era of Star Wars, which was also a downside: no Clone Wars. It was an original trilogy game, plain and simple. And to a degree, it suffered because of that. But I must say, I look back on this game very fondly. I loved it, although it was far from flawless, but I will say by the time this game came to a conclusion after its final DLC, it was a really fun game overall that I would jump straight back into in a heartbeat. 5 years on, people are still playing this game, it's just a matter of what platform you're on and how lucky you get as to whether or not you find lobbies. But one thing is for sure, the journey of this game was a turbulent ride for Battlefront fans, but this game's journey was interesting to say the very least. So in celebration of Star Wars Battlefront's 5-year anniversary, we're going to be looking back at this game, taking a bit of a nostalgia trip of what was just the start of one of two controversial Star Wars Battlefront games. So let's kick it back all the way to 2013. A Star Wars Battlefront teaser trailer dropped at E3. It was the very definition of a teaser, giving away just about nothing, but giving just enough to gauge a little bit of interest. DICE, the studio behind the Battlefield franchise under EA, were going to be bringing back arguably the most popular Star Wars game franchise of all time. The ever-elusive Battlefront 3 that was floating around in the late 2000s was definitely dead and buried now that DICE would be reviving the franchise on their own in the mid-2010s. Now flash forward to April 17th of 2015 and we got our first revealed trailer. The graphics blew everyone away. Seeing iconic Star Wars planets and characters in video game form had never looked this good. And the response was generally positive. There were many people asking where the Clone Wars was, but apart from that, all things were looking good in the lead up to the game's release. Then on the 16th of November 2015, things took a turn for the worst. Star Wars Battlefront was released to the masses and it was made known quick that the game was suffering from a severe lack of content. The game was released without a single player story mode, it had only a handful of planets and a handful of game modes with only 6 heroes in the base game at launch. The progression was shallow and uninspired and the cosmetic options weren't exactly great, with players able to play with helmetless stormtroopers, which was, believe it or not, something a lot of people complained about. Playing as iconic heroes was just a matter of luck as opposed to skill, with a hero token system that was taken out in the next Battlefront installment. It was just clear that this game had been rushed out due to hitting deadlines so the game could be released before The Force Awakens. But the movie's release date was never going to move, so the game just had to be released, and it showed. The gameplay itself was uninspired and it got stale very quickly. The marquee game mode of Battlefront, Walker Assault, was undoubtedly a lot of fun. Seeing those AT-ATs slowly progress their way through the middle of the map as the rebels try to destroy it is just a fun premise for a mode. Even though Battlefront 2 tried to replicate this with Galactic Assault across different eras, I still think it just worked better in 2015's Battlefront. But the same 4 or so maps got boring really fast, and for the Heroes vs Villains mode, which would see our iconic characters go up against each other in an all-out hero showdown, it was fine. Problem was there was only 2 lightsaber characters, those being Luke and Vader. This was the draw of the mode, Lightsaber Combat. The only problem was the Lightsaber Combat was abysmal. It was the same 2 animations over and over. Thankfully, DICE fixed this with Battlefront 2, but it was just not great at all here. Having said that though, if you timed your heavy attack with the other player, you would go into a cool stalemate animation. I definitely liked that. That was a really cool addition. But there is no doubt that the biggest issue was just how shallow this game was and how quickly the novelty of everything wore off. It was amazing to be on Hoth standing underneath an AT-AT with X-Wings flying overhead. The sound design was flawless, but it all wore off really fast. Combine all this with a very expensive season pass that would be delivering 4 major DLCs over the course of the next year, and people weren't happy as it seemed you literally had to buy the season pass to actually have a full game on your hands. People naturally didn't like this idea, so most people had their rant at the lack of content, then moved on and just never gave the game a second look again. But for those who did stick around and did front up the money for the season pass, they were not let down at all. Three months later, DICE released the Outer Rim DLC to the game, and it was met with very positive reception, bringing 2 new heroes to the game, Greedo and Nine Numb. Along with these 2 heroes, there was new weapons and star cards, some new maps, and a new game mode, Extraction. This DLC helped give the game a bit more substance, and it was seriously needed as most people who stuck with the game since launch were becoming bored due to the lack of content in the base game. The Outer Rim DLC really rebounded the game and helped bring a community together that would stick with this game all the way through to its conclusion. Flash forward another 3 months and Battlefront would receive what most people consider to be its best DLC. The Bespin Dlc came to Battlefront and delivered in a big way. This DLC brought along the same kind of content as the Outer Rim DLC did. The only difference was, this time, the quality of the heroes, the maps, and the game modes was just dialed up to 11. Delivering what I believe is one of the best maps ever seen in a Battlefront game, the Carbonite Freezing Chambers map. This DLC managed to make an obscure new hero like Dengar a fan favorite, and of course, new hero like Lando Calrissian. He was automatically a great addition to the game. I still find myself trying to go back and play this DLC, as this was the DLC that really hooked me on this game, and if that never happened, then this channel might not have existed. But it was becoming evidently clear that this game would live and die by its DLC. The only problem was that it was an expensive season pass that provided this DLC content drop. So the player base became split into 2, it was fractured, and if you couldn't afford the season pass or you didn't buy it out of principle, you were kind of stuck with a shallow, boring, and stale base game. The fun to be had with Battlefront was truly within its DLC. Flash forward another 3 months and the 3rd DLC content drop came to the game, which was the Death Star DLC, which brought obviously the Death Star to the game, including a new game mode, Battle Station, a 3-stage game mode which would see you in an actual space battle, followed by an infiltration stage on the Death Star itself, and then in the final phase it would see you completing or defending the iconic trench run to conclude the mode. The Death Star DLC had also brought 2 new heroes to the game, including Bosk and the terrible looking Chewbacca. DICE did manage to make him look a little bit better as their time progressed with this franchise, but when Chewie first came to Battlefront, he looked absolutely shocking. But having said that, the content that was within this DLC was great, but it had notably less content than the previous Bespin DLC, and when you only get content drops every 3 months, it made some fans a little bit mad. But the Death Star DLC overall was received really well and was a fine addition to the game. And I go back and look at the Battle Station game mode and I hope we see something like it again in the Battlefront franchise. But the fourth and final DLC came to Battlefront in December of 2016 to be released alongside Rogue One, a Star Wars story. The Scarif Dlc came to Battlefront and it concluded the game's post-launch content, but Battlefront didn't go quietly. The Scarif Dlc was an amazing addition to the game, giving us space-to-ground combat, although not seamless space-to-ground like most people want in Battlefront games. It of course delivered 2 new heroes, Jyn Erso and director Orson Krennic, obviously Scarif as well as Death Troopers, as well as star cards and weapons, and a multi-stage game mode. Battlefront went out with a bang, and by the time this final DLC had landed into the game, fans were very content with how this game turned itself around after 1 year. It's just a shame that the game's turnaround was at the expense of a season pass that a lot of people just couldn't afford, or just did not want to buy. But it goes without saying that those who did buy the season pass, they definitely tell you that it was worth it. The conclusion of Star Wars Battlefront meant that fans immediately wanted a sequel, and thankfully for them, their prayers were answered just months later with a teaser dropping for Battlefront 2. But that's a video for another time. Overall, looking back on Star Wars Battlefront 5 years on from its launch, it's a bit of a nostalgia trip for me. The game came so far from its launch, and by the time that final DLC hit, it was one of my favorite Star Wars games. It had its limitations for sure, and elements of the gameplay haven't exactly aged that well, but there has always been a charm to DICE's first outing in the Battlefront franchise, and for many of those hardcore Battlefront players that have stuck with the franchise through thick and thin, I think I speak for many people when I say that this game was special. There were times when I was playing its sequel and I kinda missed this game. I can't believe it's been 5 years since this game was released, honestly. It seems like only yesterday that this game was receiving its DLC drops. And it's crazy to think that if it wasn't for this game, my channel and my current job probably wouldn't be a thing right now. I owe a lot to this game, as I'm sure many of you watching this video do. And for those of you watching who weren't with this game on its journey, if you want to test your luck trying to find games, I'd recommend it for sure. You can pick the game up for a few bucks these days, and in my opinion, it's well worth it. Like I said, provided you find games, and if you're on console, I don't think you'll have any troubles. And I think you actually might have some luck, particularly those of you on console, because once Battlefront 2's live service was cancelled, this game kind of had a mini resurgence. But I will say without a doubt, Star Wars Battlefront 5 years on from its launch as a final product is a very misunderstood title, mainly due to its negative reception on launch. It could just be the rose-tinted glasses talking, but I love this game and I can't wait to see how this game looks in 5 years' time on its 10-year anniversary. Without a doubt, one of my favorite games of all time.